Wading through the chaos of Trump's second term, it's difficult to see any degree of coherent policymaking, either domestically or globally. But looking behind the curtain, a pattern emerges. So, what is it? And how does it affect us? Some of you will say I'm giving way too much credit to the Trump administration. I don't agree. Trump is one man, but there's an engine behind him, and it makes sense to understand the engine. Before I go on, I want to thank our sponsors. Oh wait, we don't have any. But do like and subscribe. What I don't have in cash, I get in kudos. Mana for the soul. There are 9 pillars of the Trump Doctrine. I should say that much of what we would call the Trump Doctrine comes from Project 2025. Let's go through them. Remember, I love lists. Here's my list of the day.
1. Mercantilism. Trump thinks like an 18th century mercantilist. In his universe, it's all a zero-sum game. I can win only if you lose. For a man like Trump, whose catchphrase was, "You're fired," this makes sense. Too bad for him that 200 years of trade theory has thrown that bullshit out the door. Trade, like capitalism, is not an I win, you lose kind of thing. It's more like a rising tide that raises boats kind of thing. In aggregate. Some boats have holes in them and, well, it sucks to have a hole in the hull of your boat. We have accumulated enough empirical evidence that free trade and low tariffs have raised hundreds of millions out of poverty and are among the most powerful engines of American growth. 2. Spheres of influence. Trump's age is showing, and, by the way, that is a credible reason why we need to set an upper limit on the age of a president. Anyway, spheres of influence were Cold War relics, and even then, the lines were blurred. The Soviet Union controlled Eastern Europe all the way up to Germany, and the US exerted dominant influence in the Western Hemisphere. Everything else was up for grabs: Vietnam, the Korean Peninsula, the Middle East, Angola, and the rest of Africa. It was a bloody time of coups and counter-coups. Assholes in power could be tolerated as long as they were our assholes. This blindness helped enable Pinochet and others like him. In aggregate, it was a foreign policy with limited returns on investment. And it got us involved in bloody conflicts, many of which we are still fighting in one form or another. Trump wants to bring that back. In his mind, Russia gets its sphere in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet space, China gets its sphere in Asia, and the US gets the Western Hemisphere. Or some variant of that. The problem is that Russia and China see this as strategic retrenchment and withdrawal, and therefore as an opportunity. This leads to greater global instability and increases the risk of serious miscalculation. 3. Transactionalism. Trump has abandoned the multilateral framework that helped America become a global behemoth in favor of bilateral deals in which America dictates terms. We've seen that some countries will humor him, but only to a point. He's sown distrust and dislike of America and has made America less trustworthy, which is already hurting the country. The world now feels that it has to move away from America. Catch Mark Carney's speech at Davos. In my opinion, it is the speech that will mark the beginning of a post-Trump world. As a result, marginal organizations and collectives like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, ASEAN, and Mercosur are gaining prominence, and there's been a growing push toward bilateral agreements. Ultimately, this means America has less say in how the world operates. Unfortunately, transactionalism ultimately devolves into a method of self-enrichment. By moving away from a structured, formal approach toward agreements, we move towards an informal process that is inherently more opaque and encourages self-dealing. 4. Territorial revisionism. I'm not a psychologist, and I don't play one on TV. But what I can say, based on what I've seen in his second term, is that Trump wants a place in the history books. Arches near Arlington, a new ballroom, his name on practically everything, and his photo in US passports. I have to renew mine next year. Ew. And then there's the territorial question. Trump wants to expand US territory, or at least to posture as if he does. Greenland, Canada, Panama, Venezuela, and Cuba. Sure, the last 2 are not strictly proposed American territories, but he did share a post presenting himself as acting president of Venezuela after Maduro was removed. He's stuck in 19th century manifest destiny nonsense. 5. Hostility to the liberal democratic constraint. To be fair to the great leader, he doesn't reject elections in the abstract any more than Orbán or Erdogan. He does, however, reject outcomes that don't favor him, and he attacks institutional independence, prosecutorial independence, independent media, universities, adverse courts, and even civil society when it protests against him. 6. Government-directed capitalism, or corporate socialism as I like to phrase it. Trump professes a love of capitalism, but his actions betray a somewhat patrimonial version of it. He wants the world to call him Daddy. Ew. The government dictates which companies win and which ones lose. Spirit Airlines collapsed because it wasn't able to absorb sky-high fuel costs, though part of that was due to its own inability to manage its finances. In a purely market-based system, he would let it collapse. Instead, his administration considered a bailout. With Intel, it went further and took a government stake. Tariffs benefit some companies, including government favorites, and punish others. Subsidies, investigations, threats to remove broadcast licenses, all of these are tools to exert greater influence over the free market. This doesn't create a more robust free market system. It creates a system that stifles innovation and weakens the creative destruction that sits at the heart of capitalism. 7. Personalist executive supremacy. Encroaching executive supremacy has been a trend pushed or tolerated by both parties, with Congress abdicating its responsibilities over war, taxation through emergency tariffs, and other areas. Check out my video listed below on the bitchification of Congress. The SCOTUS's conservative majority has also moved toward the so-called unitary executive. But leave it to Trump to take it to the next level. The state is treated less as a constitutional order and more as an instrument of the president's will. Project 2025 maps directly onto this. It seeks to bring the bureaucracy, the Justice Department, the civil service, the foreign aid apparatus, and independent agencies under tighter presidential control. Its own stated goals include dismantling the administrative state and defending national sovereignty and borders. This means less democracy, greater policy volatility, and ultimately, a less trustworthy America. 8. Civilizational nationalism. This is different from ordinary patriotism. Project 2025 is infused with a cultural nationalist view of America. Family, religion, borders, anti-woke politics, anti-DEI politics, anti-trans politics, anti-pornography rhetoric, and the claim that the country has been captured by hostile internal forces. Pete Hegseth's riveting diatribe at his congressional hearing once again made the claim that those opposing the war are enemies of the people or some such nonsense. Mr. Maximum Lethality, aka Max Steel, should stay in his lane and figure out how he got us into this mess. Anyway, the foreign policy counterpart is that America is not merely defending interests, but defending a particular civilizational identity. This is why Orbán is so welcome by those on the right, and why Vance went to stump for him. Isn't Orbán the second guy Vance has killed on a foreign visit? Cultural nationalism is also why Putin is not regarded as much of an adversary to the US by parts of the right. Vance should visit him too. Project 2025's neo-nationalist bullshit overlaps nicely with Trumpism's rhetoric about internal enemies, what he calls vermin, cultural decline, Christian-adjacent nationalism, and immigration as a civilizational threat rather than simply a labor market or border control issue. This isn't exactly the same as fascism, though there are family resemblances in the myth of national humiliation, internal enemies, leader-centered renewal, and purification politics. I'd also like to add that, counter to these Blut und Boden shitty ideologies, first described in Oswald Spengler's Der Untergang des Abendlandes, immigrants bring fresh ideas and highly motivated people. They have high rates of entrepreneurship and are substantially represented among the founders of major American companies. Available research also shows that immigrants, including unauthorized immigrants, commit crimes at lower rates than native-born Americans. 9. Coercive unilateralism. Trump has shown a blatant disregard for the international rules-based order. He threatened to take over Greenland. The Danes took that seriously, to the point that they increased their troop presence, brought in blood supplies, planned to crater the airfields, and even discussed what the rules of engagement would be with American troops. In the end, Trump backed down. Somebody spanked Daddy. Ew. Trump's tariffs went against WTO rules and penalized countries based on a fantasy tariff scheme that a first-year economics student would laugh at, using balance of payments to calculate tariffs. Some poor penguins got stuck with high tariffs. His whole Iran adventure has been a debacle, and the world is on the precipice of a recession if oil prices stay elevated. And he did it without allied consultation and without congressional approval. America flexing its muscles to coerce the world into following its whims does not a strong country make. It makes America less secure by alienating allies. It makes the global economic order more chaotic, hurting American businesses. Check out the link below that analyzes market chaos under Trump. And it encourages rent-seeking by favoring Trump allies and hurting his enemies.
The Trump Doctrine is ultimately a lesson in nostalgia. Nostalgia for a period many on the right perceive as a better time. The reality is that through the 20th century, America became stronger, richer, and freer than at any time in its history. That does not mean America became a perfect society. We still have grave problems to overcome: homelessness, poor healthcare, institutional racism and sexism, partisanship, democratic flaws such as gerrymandering, illiberalism on both the left and the right, and excessive litigation, to name only a few. But overall, America was becoming better, not worse. The Trump Doctrine threatens to overturn that progress. It would push us back toward a world that was more dangerous, more prone to war, and more tolerant of minorities being trampled underfoot. A world where a handful of powerful oligarchs exercised outsized influence over society. The Trump Doctrine is nostalgia turned into statecraft. Nostalgia for hierarchy, for protectionism, for great power bullying, for obedient institutions, for submissive allies, and for a social order in which a few powerful men decide what everyone else must endure. At its heart, this is a doctrine designed to benefit the few at the cost of the many.